Hey there, I'm so happy to be with you again on the podcast, and I am excited to introduce you to Dr. Christine Koh, who went from the halls of academia, from prestigious places like Harvard Medical School and MIT. But then she switched gears completely to start a blog called Boston Mamas, write a book by the name of Minimalist Parenting, then go on to host a show, an award-winning show for that matter, called Edit Your Life, which you need to take a listen to, by the way. She sounds like an amazing woman, doesn't she? Well, she is. And we talk about something many of us struggle with, which is how to maintain a decluttered space. So you've done the work, you've decluttered, and how not to reclutter. And we also talk about the emotional side of letting go of stuff, some practical habits you can start today, and then something that surprised us both, which is writing our own obituary. What? Trust me, you do not want to miss this episode, so go ahead, grab a cup of coffee or any beverage you prefer. If you're driving, stay safe, and let us get started. I am so honored to have you on my podcast, and I was on yours, and how exciting that was for me. And you have had a decade-long career as a music and brain scientist in academia before pursuing a more flexible and independent ventures. And in my short experience in the online space, I have had the opportunity to meet such fascinating people. And I am so happy to just know that I believe that as humans, we are all kind of installed with creativity and I love to hear about what is happening in people's lives. And so for you, you were a music and brain scientist in academia, and then have been able to create a successful platform, your blog, Boston Mamas, and then now Edit Your Life podcast. Could you share more about what that transition was like for you?
Sure. I was really excited to be a scientist. I was in music and brain science specifically, and like many good Asian children, I played violin for 20-something years. So that was definitely an interest of mine. And I had discovered that there actually was a field of psychology and music when I was in college. And I really had this dream of becoming an academic and then ultimately returning to my beloved alma mater and teaching alongside my mentors. And that was the dream. And I would say largely, I actually enjoyed my PhD. I was very independent. I did my research and I loved it. And then starting my postdoctoral fellowship in Boston was a real kind of wake-up call. I mean, I had already heard that it can be a difficult time. You're really working, doing somebody else's research and all that. But it was tough. It was actually a really good example of finally making it. I'm making kind of air quotes over the air here, but in terms of being at Harvard Medical School, Mass General Hospital, and MIT. So that's like making it in academia. But it was a miserable position and I was really unhappy. And the real transformative moment for me where I started asking questions about my future was, not surprisingly, I was a new mom. I became a new mom while I was a postdoc, and also my father died. So I really was left with this sense of, I love working. I've always loved working, but if I'm going to work and spend time away from people I care about, I really want to love what I'm doing. And I was a good scientist, but I didn't love it the way many of my friends from grad school like really loved being in that element. And that's when I decided it was time for a change.
Wow. And for most of us, I mean, change is so hard. And was it something that was like for you that could you recall like a moment like, okay, it's time, or was it kind of gradual that happened for you?
Yeah, two things that happened. Well, one, and this happened, now later in life at another transition point for me, but I was so stressed and so unhappy that it was actually having an impact on my physical person, like my hair was
Yeah.
falling out and, unhappy and stressed. And the other thing that happened was that because I was such a meticulous researcher by nature, when I became a mom and I would want to figure out what the next, what new stroller to get or what kind of this or that, I would research ad nauseum way more than I do now. And at one point I said to a tech friend of mine named Andrew, I said, "Oh, I wish there was like somewhere to put all this information because people keep asking me for it, just friends and things." And he was like, "Duh, you should start a blog." And I didn't even know what that was. And that was what led to Boston Mamas. And I started that kind of like in the middle of the night as a postdoc, as a new mom. And all of a sudden it kind of took off and people were reading. And it wasn't like I was making money at that point, but it was clearly filling a hole and a need for people. And that's kind of been the thread of my pursuits ever since, is trying to solve problems and fill a hole creatively that for something that doesn't already exist. And at that time, there was no kind of lifestyle portal in Boston. And so I started one.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. And sometimes our things happen, like, happenstance, right? But yet you, it sounds like you were like, this is for me. This is something, and not just for you, but you felt like, it was something that was needed. And with that change, now the evolution of Edit Your Life, how did that come about, from going from, Boston Mamas to Edit Your Life podcast?
Yeah, well, there was an important step in between those two things, which was my book that I co-authored with Asha Dornfest, and that was called
Awesome.
Minimalist Parenting. And it's a little shocking that that book was published in 2013. So it's quite it's had many birthdays. And in fact, it's wild to think that even back then, we didn't even include a tech chapter because tech was like not a huge thing with kids yet, which is sort of wild to even imagine now.
In a
But
short time, right?
right. So we had written that book, and Asha and I work so beautifully together. And I'm definitely the kind of person who's always like, okay, like what next? And this could be interesting. And what happened was, so much of what we wrote about in that book was related to just general, like how to live your life, how to tune into your values, all these things. And so I really wanted to have a forum in which to expand that conversation and talk more about it. And so probably not long after we kind of sent the proofs through, or that the book was published, I said to her, want to start a podcast? And so that's what happened.
So cool, so cool. And I invited you because I would love to, pick your brain on this topic of my working title as we're talking, I don't know, I could change it, but I wanted to talk about re-cluttering. So my audience may or may not have gotten to that point yet of, like, of letting go of a lot of stuff. And then what tends to happen, and I believe that there was a lot of talk about this back when the pandemic began, and we all, including myself, while we were staying at home, did a lot of decluttering, a lot of, letting go. Now, that's great, but the observations that were made was that people slowly again started to accumulate, stuff. One, naturally, and then two, some reported that they've accumulated even more after letting go of so much stuff. So what I wanted to, talk to you about is how to make that last. Like, how to, once you've done the hard work, right, of decluttering, like, how do you maintain that? And so let's see, let's go over to my back to my question of change is hard, like sustaining changes for you. You've gone through, I mean, in a short time, so much change. And how did you continue to sustain that, as far as going from academia and now to the blog, and then Edit Your Life, and then a book? I mean, that's a lot of changes.
Yeah.
What was
So
your
do you
process?
want to talk about sort of the physical acquisition and sort of the reframe
Yeah.
around that? Or
Yeah, the physical acquisition. I mean, let's see, if like in your experience having a child, did you observe the accumulation, and how did you, like, as someone who loved talking about, editing your life,
Sure.
like, how did that happen for you? Did you
Yeah,
observe the accumulation, and how did you,
of
stop
course,
it?
of
Or
course. And I have two kids and they're 6.5 years apart. So it's been sort of a fascinating repeat learning journey. And I will say, I'm human. I'm just like anybody else. And I live in a household with other people and an animal, and stuff accumulates. And this is
right.
all normal. Sure. I just want to
I
like
love
level
that.
set
Thank you.
there that nobody's perfect on this front. But the thing I wanted to mention, because it's so interesting, there is a quote, apparently something attributed to me. And I said this quote while doing interviews for Minimalist Parenting, the book. And I believe I said it on the Today Show during an interview. And it's so funny because when I started seeing this quote, and the quote is, think of yourself as a curator, not a consumer. This is the one quote, even like over a
Love
decade
that.
since that book was published, that I still see popping up on quote cards attributed to me. And when I first started seeing them, I was like, did I write that in the book? Like, I believe that. And like, I don't remember actually writing that. And so I flipped through the book. I didn't see it written. And then my co-host, Asha, like had reminded me, oh yeah, you said this in this interview. And that was like, what now, 12 years ago. And that was before we were talking about, curation and lifestyle and all that. But it was
Mhm.
something that I just felt very strongly about, that, we have to look more carefully at what we're bringing in and really think about how it serves us in our life, and whether it is something that is useful and joyful and delightful. So that's kind of been a guiding mantra. And I'm now, I think it's easier with older kids when you're not, collecting all manner of birthday tchotchkes and all these things. But I think that really the inbound flow is the big thing that we have to work on managing.
And I love how you said it in such a short way, but so rich. And that would have been my next question. You answered it. And that's like a reframing of our mindset, right? Around possessions. Like we don't necessarily need to have everything, and that we can curate our lives, and we have the freedom to. And so with that, the emotions part, Christine,
Hmm.
oh man, I've talked about this before with others. Like, how have you been able to, I don't want to say detach, because it's hard to, detach our like emotions with our stuff. We naturally treasure our things. So how do we maintain it so that it's less emotional? Like, I've seen my clients, it in my eyes, it's an item that is not valuable at all, but in their eyes it is. Um, and so how do we begin, especially later in life,
Hmm.
how do we begin to kind of deal with the emotional part of letting go and paring down and curating?
Yeah, this is such a great question, because I actually think that so much in any life stage of our struggles with consumption and stuff really boils down to a lot of our feelings. And, early on as a parent, for me, that looked like, because I grew up in scarcity. So it was really wrestling with not overcompensating, not feeling like I needed to get more to prove my love or whatever it is.
Right.
So I think, and then later in life, it's certainly, well, that's a whole other ball of wax on that scale. But I think that certainly you've seen in the work that you do that I think it is, if you're really struggling to detach from, the things, I think it's incredibly helpful to have outside help, somebody who's not attached to things. I remember, times when I've helped people like just get some traction in their house to get rid of some things. And it's just so much easier when it's an outside party who can really be like, okay, let's just tackle this area, and I'm going to help you through this. And I think also personally, if one is just doing this on their own, I think you can ask yourself questions like, okay, does this thing deserve to be in my life right now and occupy space in my life and my emotional bandwidth right now? Does this certainly, if this is an item that is connected to sort of a contentious or negative memory, let's get that mojo out. So I think there are a lot of questions one can ask in order to release some of that stuff out in the world, which I think is a really, really important process for people.
I mean, facing it is the hardest part, and I've seen even the change in a client when we're merely by their side and they're like, wow, this is so much easier with you here than if I were, by myself. But if you had to be by yourself, I love those types of questions, because those are things, right? And who matters are us humans. Those are merely like items and parts of our lives that should be, like you said, serving us. And now you've explored lots of family and lifestyle topics in your podcast. And what role do habits and routines play in long-term like maintenance of like once you've decluttered your environment? So that one question. And then what are some examples of habits that listeners could implement?
Sure. Well, my big thing, which I've always been into baby steps, but certainly in the last few years since I've started running the podcast solo, I've found myself especially passionate about all things micro and the power of micro, whether that's goals or whether that's ways to find joy in the world, that kind of thing. So I think when it comes to developing habits, I know there's a legion of Marie Kondo fans out there, but I am never going to be the person who empties an entire anything and dumps it all out and then starts adding things back in piece by piece. That's just not how I do it. Instead, I recommend, tackling really micro areas and breaking things down. And I think that's been a way to feel like, okay, I can get something done in 15 minutes, if it's a junk drawer or if it's just tackling the handbags in my closet, not the whole closet, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have a funny little, since you asked about routines, one of the things that I do is I have a recurring task on Sunday, and I think I've called it something like, I changed the number of the year depending on what year we're in. So I started this a couple of years ago, but I think it's called the 7-year declutter. And basically every Sunday I try to look for something, and I don't do it every single Sunday because maybe like sometimes I'm out of town or whatever, but it's a basic weekly reminder to look for something in my house to get rid of. And then usually I list it on the Everything is Free page in my city and it's gone in a hot minute.
Yeah.
Having that really small task, on a recurring fashion is a great way to just like feel like you're making a little bit of progress a little at a time.
I totally love that. And I mean, I really do a similar thing, and I have been really intent on doing like the, one in, one out rule, that we've heard so many times. And it's really useful because I realized in my younger years when I didn't know organizing was a thing, I would be like, why am I accumulating so much? I don't understand. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I wouldn't get rid of things. That's why they would accumulate. So that's awesome.
Well, and if I can just mention one more thing and intersect our two conversations, but you brought up, when you were on my show, you brought up kind of addressing the issue of massive amounts of duplicate. I think you were talking about towels and sheets and all that. And I think one of the best things, and maybe I brought this up on the show, on my show, but I can't remember. So I'll just say it again here. But I am not the greatest laundry folder and not like really into that part of household management. And so one of the best things that I have ever done was like reduce to 1 or 2 sets of sheets so that like you literally take the sheets off, you put them in the washer, and then you just like put them back right on your bed, or maybe you like rotate them. But having less stuff just means like less stuff to keep track of. The math is really simple.
Yeah, yeah. And it's amazing because once you get on a roll of less stuff, it's like you want to do more. It's like, the muscle that gets stronger. You're like, you know what? I need to let go of these. And now, in my hands-on work, I wanted to try to see what you would suggest. And you've already given us that one huge like lesson of, instead of being a consumer, be a curator. And I love that. And I am going to use that quote too. So put me on the bandwagon.
Wonderful.
Now, in my hands-on work with my clients who are downsizing, I've noticed an accumulation of hobby-related items.
Mm-hmm.
Any practical techniques that, that you feel that would help them resist, making new purchases with their hobbies when they're trying to downsize?
Yeah, I love this question because I am a huge fan of hobbies and developing, passions and interests and just trying new things and being okay with maybe like being terrible at it and, just trying for the sake of trying. We talked about our moms on my show, and, my 88-year-old mother is like the world's most curious person. And I think that is why she is living such a long and beautiful life. But my mother aside, I would say that, it's interesting because that you bring this up because one of the barriers to entry, I think, with hobbies is the expense of like having to buy new stuff or equipment or whatever. So my big thing here, and I have a great example, would be to really lean into just asking, checking your everything is free page if you've got one in your city, asking family or friends, like putting out like a little text ask if there's something you want to try. Because invariably, also libraries, our city library is incredible in offering like, they have like a maker space. They offer, opportunities to try where you don't even have to acquire anything. You just go try it for free. Libraries are such an underutilized resources in many places. So definitely check that out. And the great example I want to share is that, and so I've certainly given away tons of, craft and other supply materials that way. But recently my 14-year-old wanted to experiment with making pasta, and she made some just like rolling it out by hand. And she was like, yeah, I know without a machine, it's probably going to be a little chunky, but I want to try it. She really loved the process. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to put out like just like in search of ask on my everything is free page. And so like, yes, this is something coming into my house, but it was something of value. So I put out an ask and I kind of made a joke. I said, any chance, this is a long shot, but any chance somebody has a pasta maker, like one of those hand crank rollers, perhaps one that you received as a wedding gift 20 years ago and it's still sitting unopened in your closet. And somebody messaged me and said, I am exactly that person. So, and she was so thrilled to give it to me. I felt like I had won the lottery because this was like a brand new retail value, $120 pasta machine. So my kid could learn a skill. It turns out that it was a wonderful thing to bring into our home because she's made pasta several times, including for friends, for family. Like, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And then that experience actually really, because we received something that brought so much joy and so much fun and conversation and care, like actually made pasta for a friend whose, in-law had recently died. So like, there was just like a lot of love and care in that moment. And so that's inspired me to really level up and think, okay, like, what do I have that's really like of value, but is not serving me and I'm not going to pursue it? And like, what could I give away and pass forward? So that has like further amplified my lens of trying to, help support other people's hobbies and interests through the Everything is Free page.
And what stood out to me, what you were saying is that, it turned out to be like a moment of sharing the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider yourself, is that something that you say, I'm a minimalist, type thing? Are you into those like labels?
Yeah. It's funny. My book is called Minimalist Parenting. And oftentimes when we were on book tour or when I talk about the book, we often started with what it's not. So it's not about like living with one chair and we believe toilet paper is good and all these things. but it's more about, so I probably wouldn't, you know, go out and identify myself as a
Mm-hmm.
minimalist, in a strict sense. But if I could expand the definition and say, yes, I'm a minimalist in terms of really thinking hard about how to have my values and what I care about and what I believe be the foundation to everything I do, whether that's how I work, how I show up in relationships, how I acquire things, how I get rid of things, then yes, but it's a more complicated,
Yeah,
unnecessarily
I agree.
complicated and human description, I think.
Totally agree. It's different for everyone. And I think that's what I had to come to understand for myself. Like, I didn't have when you start to like, compare your ways of minimalism with someone else, then that's where kind of we go wrong because you're like, wait a minute, that's not how I want to do things. I'm loving this conversation, Christine. I'm learning so much from you. And now staying motivated. So considering and maintaining a decluttered lifestyle after a downsize, we both know it's a long-term endeavor. And for those who are given the opportunity to, like some of my clients, they have a few months, to do it, to be able to pare down their items before going into a smaller place. But, and that's the best ideal situation. And then others who would have to do it in a hurry. So for those who do have that time to declutter, whether it be months or a year or 2 years, how what advice do you have for staying motivated and consistent with resisting new clutter
Yeah,
coming
I think
into
this
the
is a,
home?
a great question. And I want to just say, because I have, aging parents and in-laws in the mix where I'm
Mm.
seeing, things playing out in real time, that I really
Yeah.
understand and am compassionate about the challenges of thinking about having less space. I will say personally, I'm like so here for it when the time comes. I'm like really into the idea of like just living in a tiny little place with, less space means less to take care of. But I would say that like one thing that, I mean, that certainly motivates me and has been very effective is, I'm sure there's some historical something underpinning to this, but, we went through this consumer phase where, and are probably still in it to some degree, if I look at the houses and things being built, in my city, but where bigger was better and more storage and more this. And I just very much feel the opposite. And I think a good concrete example is my closet. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I think a closet is something that a lot of people have, and you might have a walk-in closet. I have like a small walk-in closet. I think I measured it in advance thinking about this recording, but it's maybe 5 feet wide by 8 feet deep or something. It's basically enough for some hanging shelves and like or some hangers and then like some shelves.
Hmm.
And at one point, and this is a sort of tenet that I've applied to sort of my life in general, is I want to see what I have. I don't want to
Yeah.
have stuff in storage.
Right.
I don't want to like have a
Hmm.
capsule I'm rotating around. I just want to see what I have, whether that's in the pantry, whether that's in my craft closet, which does need some help and some organization, whether that's in my clothing closet. And so the big move, the power move I made, which actually was not that hard at all, is I had a dresser and I'm like, I don't want a dresser because then I stuff t-shirts and stuff in there and I can't see them. And then they're
Uh-huh.
just full
Yep.
and they're messy and I hate folding clothes. So I got rid of my dresser and I committed to only having, I forget what it was, like 50 hangers or something like that. Like, so having a fixed number of hangers and then only fitting in that closet what I could fit. And it has been such a game changer. I don't, well, I also do clothing rental just because I love it. And so I don't really accumulate that much, but I also am like paring down. I went through a big pare down of shoes and handbags and things I'm just not using anymore. So, sorry, long-winded way to say that really defining the space and
Mm.
having agency over the space and saying to yourself, I want to be able to see what I have so I can access it when I need it. is a really, really great move if you want to try to like winnow stuff down. Because I think everybody's got boxes and bins and things you don't know what is in there, and it
Oh
just
yeah.
takes up space, and then it's a headache to declutter later. So this is a way to get ahead of it, is to start working on this kind of like, what, how can I just see what's in front of me?
That's great. And it's great that you said that because I also do not have dressers. My son and my husband do. They use the dressers that we bought years ago, and I decided I'm not putting my clothes in there.
Yeah.
And it really has been a game changer because one, I get to dress up in the closet. Like I have everything, like I can grab the what I need, undergarments, the everything. When everything's in, like you said, in front of you, one, the convenience of it for me. And then two, I'm not forgetting what I have.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's so cool that we both don't.
Yeah, that's another connection. And I will say, I think when you can see, when you're continually reminded of what you have,
Uh-huh.
I don't
Yep.
really shop anymore, like in a regular way. But if you, are shopping for clothes, like, because you have that reminder of like, oh yeah, I already do have 5 black, button down shirts. Like I really don't need another one. It's just this continual reminder of what you have that can help, I think, curb stuff inbound.
Yes. And so with that, as a researcher, as a brain scientist, do you feel like it's never too late to like learn these new ways, even later in life? How do you feel about that?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think continual learning always is, how we stay strong. I will say I'm nearly 20 years out of academia, so I can't speak to the latest science, but I think
That's okay.
for sure, whether it's trying to consider and expand your mind to things and new ways of doing things and new habits, like I think that is super valuable. And certainly, keeping active mentally and physically is important.
Yeah.
But I do want to point out that I do think, and we touched on emotions and feelings
Yeah.
earlier, but I actually think that a big struggle with stuff, like as we age, is more to do with the fear of mortality. Our culture in America is like
So
so fearful
true.
of death, which I find both really confusing and really fascinating because the life cycle is around us always. So I would, not being a therapist, but being very deep in the thinking about all this stuff, I would venture to guess that the more, one can find a sense of contentment in the present and excitement about hobbies, which we talked about, and acceptance of just like the reality of death. Like, I think the more you
Yeah.
can do that, the easier it is going to be to think more practically about material objects.
Yeah, yeah. And really appreciating, I mean, as I'm looking at things that I have held on to for a very long time, I mean, it's just about, for me, I've learned to start to appreciate the past.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I still, I can't go back. I can't go back to the past. This is a reminder, of the past. But, um, like you said, I can treasure the good memories, be a curator, right, of your life. But why am I keeping this, you know, and this is a recent experience. Why am I keeping this reminder, this photo? Oh my goodness, this photo of, an event or something that was like turned out to be, a not so good experience with this person. Like why kind of bring that back out, what, to make me feel bad all over again, type thing. And so and I think that I love that, just being a curator. Hey, I'm not saying that, I'm gonna go ahead and suppress the past, but the things that I am going to treasure and hold on to, I want that to be like good memories,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think, just to tag on one additional thought about this, I think, as you can tell, and as your listeners will be discovering right now in real time, like I am practical and I am very realistic about,
love that.
mortality,
Yeah.
and that's just what it is. Like, what a gift it is to live this life right now. Like, so why don't we live it
Yeah.
right now? And I think
Yeah.
it's a real big priority for me with my two kids to not have my legacy be a giant headache. So, I mean, listen, I'm Asian.
Yeah.
I expect to live another 30, 40, or 50 years. But, my adulting paperwork is in order. That is something I cannot recommend to people to do enough. And I'm continually working, as we've talked about in this conversation, on this lens of like, what can I pass along? Like, and wanting to engage in that process right now while I have the energy and the ability to move stuff. Because if I'm thinking forward, with love and how I want to like live my best life as an elderly person, and I'm on my like last month or two, I want to be like spending time with the people I care about, not like fussing over material things. So
That's
I think
so
that's like
awesome.
a real gift to give forward and to think about it. And like, again, like we've talked about reframing, but reframing the lens to like, how do I want to be able to show up like later in my life so I can live my life really well, like at the end. And I don't think it's morbid. I think it's just, practical,
It's
and I think
not.
it's great.
Mhm.
So that's just my plug for like, coming to terms with the reality of life.
I love that, Christine. And my niece, she cracks up with me because I mean, at 47, I think about exactly that. Like, what legacy am I going to leave behind? And I would joke around with her and say, okay, so these are my funeral songs. So you got to make sure that you play them. Okay. But in all seriousness, it does help us to, like you said, to reframe. It does help us to live even more like, hey, if I had only, like you said, if I had only 2 months to live, would it matter if I kept these 10 sweaters or not? Does it even really matter? And, you touched on getting your paperwork in order. And that is something that I have seen a lot of, where my dear clients are, if they don't have any help early on. Like, I have a client who, I mean, her son is a lawyer, so she's all set with her paperwork. But for the most of us, we need to get that um straightened out ourselves, or get professional help. Like, how did you get started, on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that, so when I had my kids are 6.5 years apart. When I had my first kid, I just did like LegalZoom. I just did it online or something. And then
Mm.
when it was time to redo the will, we redid it like before our second kid was born, or maybe like just after she was born. And we wanted to redo it also because, we had bought a house, our life was a little more complicated, that kind of thing. And I think the hardest part about the process, it's not a hard process. Like, you basically just have to figure out where you want to designate things and then find a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And, the third time around, when we just revised like a year ago, I found a different lawyer to work with. But I think the biggest thing, and again, this is because it's connected to feelings, is thinking like,
Yep.
depending on the age of your kids, like, who would take my beloved children, and
Yeah.
the first time around it was easy because, the in-laws, all the grandparents were pretty young. But then the second time around, they were older, and like that wasn't a viable
Mm.
option. So we had to think differently about it. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is just figuring out um, who would fill those roles if you are a parent. But I just think it's so important. It's such a good step. And then also, because a lot of people don't know about this, I will say that once my kid turned 18, I also, they need to have their like power of attorney document set up, because they're not by default just going to fall under whatever your paperwork says. So I just
True.
used Mama Bear Legal or something to uh, quickly process her paperwork so that all of her documents are in order. And then all we needed to do was go to a local bank and notarize it. And I remember the bank person being like, wow, this is pretty organized. I don't see a lot of people coming in and getting this taken care of. And I was like, when you take care of it, like, hopefully you'll never need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But just
Right.
having
Right.
it in order is huge peace of mind, knowing that like our assets are designated, that our kids have a plan. God forbid, should something happen. But just knowing there's a plan, there's a real comfort and peace of mind in that. And I really can't recommend it enough for people. Both of my parents did not have their paperwork in order, like having 7 kids and all these things. So I believe when my dad passed, he didn't even have a will, which was just stunning to me. So my mom is all set now. She's got her paperwork in order.
That's wonderful. And I've gone through it myself with my father-in-law. He did not have a will. And I can only imagine like the percentage of, of us who, have not gotten our affairs, like, paperwork in order. And it's a lot of, one, you're already grieving, like, my husband was already grieving. And 2, at the same time, you'll have to deal with all the paperwork, legal rigmarole that you have to go through. And I love that I enjoy hearing you saying that, hey, death is a normal part of life. And I want to have my listeners say, yeah, and it's okay to begin to think about it. We don't have to fear that stage in life, but instead we have agency,
Yes.
At this time to to make the moves that we need to make so that later in life, like you said, we have that peace of mind. Hey, it's set.
For sure. I mean, we take so much care to build these lives that we have, right?
Yeah.
And so, reframe to think that like getting my will done or whatever is just making sure that, my legacy is playing out the way that I want to, in a way that is caring and like, will set my kids up, or if you have kids or whatever. So I think it's a really good thing. And I'll actually just tag on one other funny thing that I don't think I've even said out loud to anybody. So you're the first. But
Yay.
I even was recently thinking, having seen some friends struggle through this, I was even like, be cool. I should just take like a half hour and like write my own obituary. And the reason I was thinking about that is because I've had a couple friends who've had parents pass in the last year, and writing the obituaries was so stressful because you're trying to get it right. You don't know, you don't have all the historical pieces. Then family come to you because you got something wrong. It's this big, like, emotional mess, right? And so I just feel like I think I'm going to just make life easier for, whoever, and like write that thing at some point and then give it to somebody and be like, oh, it's in this box. Like, use that when you need it.
Okay, Christine, one more thing. I've done it. I have my average.
I'm really leveling up the adulting on this episode. I mean, it's really something.
Oh, I love it. And, as we're laughing, and it's like, something that, this is serious, but at the same time, we can take it lightly and say, you know what, it takes a little bit of humor to be like, okay, well, yeah, it's going to happen, but let's make it fun. Let's create something. And as a creative person, like, that's only a part of it, and we can pass it on, to our kids. And so for the last portion of our episode, please tell us about one thing that you are enjoying and that motivates you right now.
Okay, wow. There's a lot. I think I'm kind of thinking those like as like separate buckets, but they're also related. I think one thing right this minute that I'm enjoying is the sort of joyful anticipation that comes with spring, because I'm like a new-ish gardener, and last season, last summer, I planted a bed of medicinal herbs because one of my little side things, passions, hobbies that I love is, medicinal herbs and making salves and all this kind of stuff. So, I'm waiting for everything to finally melt off and the ground to start healing, and to see if things I planted last year is, come back. Like we were talking about life cycle, like this is it in nature form, and it's pretty exciting. And then the thing that motivates me, honestly, my husband and kids and my mom especially really just are sort of, I mean, there's nothing remarkable or special or significant milestone wise, but I think on a daily basis, just their presence like really motivates me to like live
That's
well
sweet.
in the present and for the future. So I think a lot about them. Obviously, we've talked about how that plays out in decluttering and obituary writing and all that, but also just keeping myself healthy and,
Yeah.
finding purpose and being joyful and learning new things and remaining curious across my whole life. Like these are the things that sound so basic, but they're actually everything. And so, that's what keeps me going,
Right.
especially in hard times.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, Christine. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing yourself with this podcast. I know that my listeners will appreciate it so much and all that you have shared. And so thank you once again. And I cannot wait to continue possibly, the conversation and to get to know you more through, in time. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Grace. This was a real pleasure. I appreciate you.